What's going on, everybody? RJ Ochoa here from SB Nation's bloggingtheboys.com. Hope all is well wherever you are. Hope you're happy, safe, healthy, and that you're ready for the Dallas Cowboys and their mandatory minicamp this week. Should provide us some interesting storylines around the team. In fact, I wrote something at bloggingtheboys.com anticipating some storylines. It is a unique thing in that it's a mandatory minicamp, and it's a minicamp in general in June, and it's kind of a big deal, kind of football, but not what we want to see. We're, just kind of trying to make it through the final real doldrums of the offseason in anticipation of training camp beginning next month. So any bit of football activity, any bit of chum in the water, we will certainly take it. And that's why we're here today. It is Monday, June the 9th, 2025. Going to be a busy week here on the channel. So if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the Blog on the Boys YouTube channel. Got videos coming all the time. On Tuesday and Thursday this week, we'll get my Bleacher Report shows. On Wednesday, going to have an interview with my good buddy John Owning, talking about a lot of different things relative to the Cowboys. And Friday, we'll see. But today, we're talking about something that actually developed bright and early on Monday morning. I was walking my dogs, Bear and Honey. Their birthdays were last week. Thank you to those of you who wished them a happy birthday on my social channels. I'm on X, Instagram, and Threads at RJ Ochoa if you want to follow. TikTok, rj.ochoa. Search for RJ Ochoa on Facebook to like my Facebook page, on Blue Sky, on LinkedIn, whatever you want. I'm actually in the middle of doing a challenge right now on social. I'm trying to make 10 straight 5-foot putts. I have a putting mat, and I'm trying to do it. And on Monday's video, I made 8. They weren't 8 consecutive, but still, I want to make all 10. So I'm working on that. I'm on day 3. So we'll see how many days it ultimately takes me. But that being said, while I was walking Bear and Honey, I got all the alerts from all the NFL and national insiders that the Green Bay Packers were releasing cornerback Jaire Alexander. Of course, Alexander's been a big part of what the Packers have done, that run they had during Aaron Rodgers' MVP seasons and even the time after under Matt LaFleur. They've obviously been very stable and obviously destroyed the Cowboys to a degree in which the Cowboys are still kind of put themselves back together from now about a year and a half later. But Jaire Alexander is a player who can help a lot of teams, and the Cowboys are seemingly a team who are in need of a quality corner. We've obviously talked about Jalen Ramsey to some extent as a fan base, but this is a player who you wouldn't have to trade for, a player who's available on the open market. So let's get into it. Now, the reason I think you first have to kind of the first thing you have to understand, let's put this up on your screen here. This is the Dallas Cowboys depth chart over at Our Lads. Shout out to my friends over there. This is one of my positions of most serious concern for the Cowboys on the roster. I talked about this with Sky last week. Make sure, again, to check out all the videos in the channel. I brought up a prediction that I asked Sky for a prediction that he hoped to be wrong about. And the one that I hoped to be wrong about was relative to Trayvon Diggs and saying that it was going to be kind of an up and down season. And, some of that is obviously about our fears and trepidations around the injury and the recovery from injury. But the Cowboys cornerback situation is a real boom or bust proposition. There are lots of ways it can turn out wonderfully, but there are also lots of potential potholes. Again, Trayvon Diggs is kind of an example of that. We don't know what he's going to offer. We don't know how much he's going to play. Is he going to start the season on the PUP list? This is all kind of weird and strange. That being said, Deron Bland we feel great about, but is Deron Bland going to get a contract extension from the Cowboys? Now, Jaire Alexander wouldn't solve that, but is Deron Bland going to be fully healthy himself? We certainly didn't anticipate the foot issue last year, but that is a question. But he's probably the most reliable corner on the team right now. Savon Ravel obviously is a point of depth at this point and is the future, but how much is he going to play at the beginning of things? Is he going to be recovered from injury fully and ready to go? Kaiir Elam, what if he doesn't pan out? I wrote an article last week at our site talking about how he is maybe potentially going to be the highest return on investment for the Cowboys in terms of all of the offseason trades that they made. If he hits and he's awesome and he plays like the player that was at Florida who Buffalo thought they were getting, then all of a sudden you're cooking with some gas. But what if that doesn't happen? You can see how you do have to ask several what ifs, but an NFL season is a battle of attrition. In an NFL season, things can go wrong, and lots of what ifs can start to pile and stack themselves together very quickly, and you can very, very quickly be up a creek, so to speak. So let's take this off your screen. Let's look at what, let's see, let me pull this up right here. This is what Rob Demovsky wrote about the Jaire Alexander release. Rob is one of the best people who covers the Packers, has done so for forever, does so for ESPN. Let's put this on your screen now. So this is the ESPN article about Jaire Alexander's release. I'll zoom in just a bit so you can see it nice in center. There we go. So this is the part that I think is the most interesting. Talking about the release, he says it came one day before Alexander had planned to report for the team's mandatory minicamp. Obviously, it's been a big subject across the entire NFL, whether players like James Cook and Kirk Cousins will show up. We don't have that same question with Micah Parsons because he said he would. By the way, the video of Micah calling Brian Schottenheimer to say goodnight was absolutely hilarious. I shared it on social as well. But this is what's important. Alexander appeared in just 7 regular season games each of the past 2 seasons and did not play after November 17th last year, despite practicing on a semi-regular basis. He went on injured reserve the final week of the season and had knee surgery on what he said was a torn PCL. Still, he finished second on the team in pass breakups and tied for second interceptions. That came a year after shoulder and knee injuries, plus a 1-game suspension for conduct, detrimental to the team, limited him to 7 games. Okay, that's a lot to unpack. Should the Cowboys trade for this player? Should the Cowboys sign Jaire Alexander? Because some of that is concerning. Some of that is worth stopping and pausing and saying, I don't know, you're not getting the player that you really helped the Packers and sort of circa 2019-ish, 2021-ish, 2022-ish. It's been a long time since then. Even though it feels like 2022 was like 5 minutes ago, it was now 3 years ago. That being said, this is one of those you talk about. You're a front office that likes to add people all the time. You want to save some funds and some money for a rainy day. Well, it's cloudy outside, right? Like it's cloudy outside, and this is a player who can help your team. And you're not going to get any player at any position, whether it's by trade or on the open market at this point, who's going to be demeritless, who's not going to have a single con, because it's often said relative to actual free agency that players reach free agency for a reason, right? Players are not retained by their teams. Ultimately, we can break it down in that simple of a way if we'd like. We can understand that a team is letting a player go, whether that's in March or in June, for a reason, because they feel comfortable, because they don't want to pay this, because they don't want to go through that, whatever. And the Packers have had some issues with Alexander for a long time and moved on. What situation does that sound like? I'm not saying these are identical, but like George Pickens and the Pittsburgh Steelers, they were willing to move on. They didn't feel like it was worth it. And then they went out and acquired Aaron Rodgers, which is kind of an interesting sort of twist for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but we're not here to talk about them. That being said, I do think that Jaire Alexander is a player who can provide a legitimate point of depth for the Cowboys in the cornerback position, a place where they have some questions. And it's kind of like wide receiver in that sense, right? Relative to the Pickens trade, and again, hand up, I was against it. I tell you that all the time because I want you to hold me accountable. The Cowboys had some serious questions at wide receiver. So what do? They go out and they add somebody to it. Ted McMillan didn't fall to them, et cetera, XYZ. And George Pickens was kind of the next best available option, a player who was available for a reason. The Steelers were willing to move on from George Pickens for a reason. The Packers have moved on from Alexander for a reason. One of the things I always like to do, and I do this all the time during the season and whatnot, is look at what NFL Pro has to say about these players. So they have these great little nuggets, and I share these a lot on social. Let's put this front and center. Let's zoom in. These are all, oh goodness gracious, these are all of Jaire Alexander's little nuggets across last year. Let's see here if I can move. No, it's not going to do that. Let's zoom out a little bit. All right, there we go. There we go. I was breaking this. All right, now we're here. All right, Jaire Alexander. This is the matchup against Indianapolis specifically. This was in September. Jaire Alexander shadowed A.J. Brown. I don't know why it says Michael Pittman or why it says A.J. Brown. This was a bug, but this was in the I don't know why it says A.J. Brown, but this was never mind. Jaire Alexander shadowed A.J. Brown by lining up against him on 23 of his 35 routes in week 1. That was the season opener in Brazil. Alexander came away with an interception, etc. I don't know why it says Michael Pittman. This has got me confused, but here we go. Let's move on. Jaire Alexander has allowed just 2 receptions for 12 yards on 5 targets as the nearest defender in coverage over the past 2 weeks. In 4 games played from weeks 1 to 6, Alexander allowed 15 receptions for 232 yards and 2 touchdowns and 24 targets. So again, some perspective there. That's why I like these. Alexander allowed 2 receptions for 12 yards. This was week 7 through 8. The Packers defense, this was the one that I really wanted to show you, has allowed a 61% completion percentage with Alexander on the field this season, 12 percentage points lower than their completion percentage allowed with him off of the field. And let me move over here so we don't break this again. Here we go. Alexander has recorded a 23.3% ball hawk rate this season, the highest in his career, and the second highest among cornerbacks with at least 100 coverage snaps. This was on November 26th. So this wasn't a long time ago. I mean, or this wasn't, early in the season before a lot of football was played, is my point. Alexander has recorded 7 passes defense this season, translating to the third highest ball hawk rate. Obviously, we just read about this among outside corners with at least 20 targets. You can dress this up a lot. Packers have allowed this is later in the season, 9.7% lower completion percentage with Alexander on the field compared to when he's not. And finally, this was the playoff loss to the Eagles. This is why I was confused, because I read this one first. Alexander lined up against A.J. Brown on 23 of his 35 routes and pressed him on 6 of 23. Alexander came away with an interception, but also allowed 4 receptions for 108 yards and a touchdown when targeted as the nearest defender against Brown, the second most of yards he's allowed to a single receiver in a game in his career. Alexander was placed on injured reserve before the Packers' final game of the season. Okay, so not great. In that respect, right? Not great that A.J. Brown is a thorn in his side, seemingly, given who the Cowboys are and who A.J. Brown is relative to them. But this is still a player who can really help this team. And I don't think the Cowboys let me be very clear. I'm not saying this or doing this and having this conversation and telling you if the Cowboys don't sign A.J. Brown, they're not being serious. I don't feel that way at all. But this is, I don't even want to say a gift that has fallen in their lap, but this is an opportunity to explore. And for all we know, they are exploring it. For all we know, the Cowboys are considering this, and they should be. They should be seriously considering Jaire Alexander, because he's a player who plays a position that is of some relative concern, of some relative need. If you asked me right now for the position group in which I carry the most questions, I talked about at the beginning, it's the cornerback group, and it could be fine. It could be fine. I would just rather not depend on that. Now, I recognize interjecting Jaire Alexander is adding another what-if proposition, but if you have 10 what ifs, you're more likely to hit on something than if you have 3 what ifs, right? It's like in Friends when they all bought the lottery tickets, right? Like if 6 people go in at $50 each to buy a lottery ticket, your odds of doing something very difficult, which would be from a statistical probability standpoint, which would be winning the lottery, they're better than if you were one person by yourself. So my point is, if we recognize the Cowboys have several what ifs at corner, right? And the what ifs are, what if Trayvon Diggs plays well? What if he doesn't? What if the injury, blah, blah? What if Jerron Bland is fine? What if Kaiir Elam plays like a first rounder, like he was with the Florida Gators? What if he plays like the player the Buffalo Bills wanted to move on from? What if Savon Ravel is ready? What if he isn't? That's 4 what ifs. All right. That's 4 what ifs. Let's add a 5th. I mean, we might as well add a 5th at this point. So I think the Cowboys should explore this. Now, if they do sign him, it isn't a slam dunk, oh my gosh, Super Bowl, everything is perfect, everything is amazing. But this is the kind of thing that you do when you are dressing up your roster and you're plugging holes in advance, which has always been our decree. We've always said the Cowboys should treat free agency as a way to raise their floor so that when the what ifs happen, they aren't brought back down to 0 or down into the red, right? We want this team to stay in the black at every single position from a surplus standpoint, from a what you have in the cupboard standpoint. So this is a move the Cowboys should consider, in my humble opinion. But who am I? I'm just Jaire Ochoa, somebody who covers the Dallas Cowboys, likes to talk about them with you here on the Blog on the Boys YouTube channel. So if you haven't yet, please subscribe. I'm also on social media, X, Instagram, Threads, as noted, TikTok, Blue Sky, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever you want, all sorts of things. I'm going to write about this as well, so make sure you check out blogontheboys.com for thoughts that are a little bit more organized and aren't as frenetic as me looking at them and getting confused by words for whatever reason that happened. But yeah, Jaire Alexander, the Dallas Cowboys, if I applied a scale, if I applied a weight, if I said they should definitely do this, and how intense I feel about that, with 10 being like standing up, pounding the table, you got to go do it, and 1 being like super chill, I don't need you to do it, I'm like a 6. I mean, it would be nice. I mean, it's the same reason that people want them to trade for Jalen Ramsey or whatever the case. They need help at corner. That's really the point. And they don't like flashing red light need help the way they did at wide receiver. We all recognize that. We all understand that. But it is a position that is on, some shaky ground. It's not the house that the little pig built of straw, but it's the house that the little pig built of twigs, right? Like it can stand a huff and a puff, but the moment the big bad wolf takes a deep breath to get another one, that's when it could, get a little bit shaky. We want every house to be built of brick and mortar and cement and whatever else you want to say. I think that was an analogy that made sense, if you want my opinion, like I said. But let's go ahead and get out of here. Tuesday, you get the Bleacher Report show. Wednesday, the John Owning interview. Thursday, the Bleacher Report show, and we'll see what we have in the hopper for you on Friday as well. But Thank you so much, everybody, for hanging out. I hope you have a wonderful Monday, wonderful start to your week. And with all that being said, we will see you next time.